Women should be competing against women. Men should be competing against men. And transgenders should be competing against transgenders. I have no problem with it whatsoever. I don't know why that's controversial.
I have never seen an organization more committed to self-imploding than the WNBA. A few weeks ago, I made this video highlighting how it appears Brittney Griner said, bleep, white girl, after fouling out in a game against Indiana Fever, the team that Caitlin Clark plays for. Some people like Jamel Hill, former ESPN host, says that no, she didn't say bleep white girl. She says bleep whack call, to which she then went on to call me a grifter for even pointing this out, but besides the point. You can watch and make up your own mind as to what it appears Brittney Griner is saying.
The WNBA just got absolutely destroyed by someone who doesn't even play basketball. When Riley Gaines dropped her nuclear take on the Brittney Griner situation, she didn't just call out one player, she exposed an entire organization's corruption. What happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about professional women's sports. The controversy started with a single moment caught on camera. During a heated playoff game between the Atlanta Dream and Indiana Fever, Brittney Griner fouled out after going head-to-head with rookie sensation Caitlin Clark. As Griner walked off the court, cameras captured what appeared to be her muttering something under her breath. Lip readers and social media exploded with claims that she called Clark a trash white girl. The video went viral instantly, racking up millions of views and sparking outrage across the sports world. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of addressing the situation head-on, the WNBA went into full damage control mode. They refused to comment, refused to investigate, and basically pretended nothing happened. This is the same league that had just spent weeks investigating completely false accusations against Caitlin Clark's fans. When Angel Reese claimed fever, fans directed racial slurs at her. The WNBA launched a full investigation within hours. When they found zero evidence to support her claims, did they apologize? Did they call out the false accusations? Absolutely not. Riley Gaines saw this hypocrisy and decided she'd had enough. The former Olympic swimmer, who's become a fearless advocate for fairness in sports, took to social media with a message that sent shockwaves through the basketball world. She didn't just criticize Griner's apparent comments. She reminded everyone of the context that made this situation even more outrageous. This is the same Brittney Griner who was imprisoned in Russia, and freed only because the United States government traded one of the world's most dangerous arms dealers to get her back. Victor Bout, known as the Merchant of Destruction, had been serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy to harm Americans and providing aid to dangerous groups. The Biden administration released this international criminal to secure Griner's freedom. And now, according to the viral video, this is how she shows her gratitude, by making derogatory comments about a fellow American athlete based on her race. Gaines didn't stop there. She pointed out the obvious double standard that anyone with eyes could see. If Caitlin Clark had been caught on video making similar comments about Brittney Griner, what would have happened? The media would have crucified her. Sponsors would have dropped her immediately. The WNBA would have suspended her indefinitely. But because it was Griner making the comments and Clark receiving them, suddenly everyone wanted to pretend they couldn't tell what was being said. The situation got even more ridiculous when Outkick, a sports media outlet, decided to do what journalism is supposed to do: ask questions. They applied for media credentials to cover Griner's next game so they could ask her directly about the controversial comments. The WNBA's response? They denied the credentials. An organization that depends on media coverage for survival suddenly decided they had limited space for journalists who might ask uncomfortable questions. This is where Riley Gaines really started dropping truth bombs. She pointed out that no one in mainstream sports media had even tried to get answers from Griner herself. They were all content to speculate, make excuses, and gaslight viewers about what their own eyes were showing them. But when someone actually tried to practice journalism and get to the truth, the WNBA blocked access. The former swimmer's background gives her unique credibility on these issues. She's been through the ringer herself, forced to compete against biological males in women's swimming and then vilified for speaking out about it. She knows what it's like to be targeted by mainstream media for telling uncomfortable truths. She's seen how sports organizations can betray their own athletes in the name of protecting certain narratives. What makes Gaines such a formidable critic is her lived experience with institutional dysfunction. She's watched firsthand as organizations prioritize politics over athletes, narratives over fairness. When she competed, she was forced to share locker rooms, compete for scholarships, and race against athletes who had clear biological advantages. The psychological impact of that experience can't be understated. Imagine training your entire life for something, only to have the system change the rules midway through. But Gaines didn't just accept the unfairness quietly. She spoke up, knowing full well it would make her a target for criticism and personal attacks. She endured countless interviews where hostile journalists tried to paint her as a bigot for simply advocating for fair competition. She faced social media harassment, had speaking engagements canceled, and was essentially blacklisted from certain circles in the swimming world. This background gives her a unique perspective on what's happening with Caitlin Clark. She recognizes the pattern of institutional capture, where organizations become so focused on protecting certain ideologies that they betray their own stated missions. She's seen how sports leadership can become corrupted by outside pressure and lose sight of what actually matters: the athletes and the integrity of competition. When Gaines saw the WNBA's response to the Griner situation, all of these experiences came flooding back. Here was another example of an organization choosing politics over fairness, narrative protection over athlete welfare. The parallels were too obvious to ignore, and her moral authority on these issues made her the perfect person to call it out. The swimming community's response to Gaines's advocacy also prepared her for what she's facing now with the WNBA controversy. She knows exactly how these institutions operate when they're under pressure. They'll try to discredit the messenger, control the narrative, and wait for the controversy to blow over. But Gaines has learned how to navigate these tactics effectively, which is why her intervention in the WNBA situation has been so devastating. Her experience also taught her the importance of staying focused on the core issues, rather than getting distracted by personal attacks. When critics tried to make this about her personally, rather than the institutional problems she's exposing, Gaines didn't take the bait. She kept redirecting attention back to the WNBA's double standards and hypocritical behavior. This disciplined approach has made her criticism much more effective than it would have been coming from someone without her background. She's not just throwing stones from the outside. She's someone who has been through similar battles and understands exactly what's at stake. Her credibility on these issues is unassailable, which is why the WNBA and their media allies have struggled so much to counter her arguments. When Gaines saw the WNBA pulling the same playbook, protecting favored players while throwing others under the bus, she recognized the pattern immediately. Her response was surgical in its precision and devastating in its accuracy. She called the WNBA an organization more committed to self-imploding than success, and the evidence backs up every word. Think about this logically. Caitlin Clark is the best thing to happen to women's basketball in decades. She's brought millions of new fans to the sport, filled arenas across the country, and generated more positive attention for the WNBA than any player in history. Television ratings are up, merchandise sales are booming, and suddenly people who never cared about women's basketball are buying tickets and tuning in. But instead of protecting and celebrating their golden goose, what does the WNBA do? They investigate fake controversies that might make Clark look bad, while ignoring real controversies that might make other players look bad. They allow veteran players to physically target and verbally attack their biggest star while pretending it's all just competitive basketball. They're literally working against their own interests. This backward approach is exactly what Riley Gaines called out so effectively. She pointed out that the league seems more interested in appeasing players who resent Clark's success than protecting the athlete who's actually bringing value to their organization. It's organizational dysfunction at its finest, and Gaines forced everyone to see it clearly. But the dysfunction goes even deeper than most people realize. The WNBA's problems aren't just about this one incident, or even just about their treatment of Caitlin Clark. They're symptomatic of a league that has lost its way completely. For years, the WNBA has struggled with identity issues, never quite figuring out how to market itself or build a sustainable fan base. The league has tried everything. Political activism, social justice messaging, celebrity endorsements, rule changes, you name it. But nothing worked because they were trying to manufacture excitement and relevance instead of letting it grow organically through great basketball and compelling storylines. Then Clark comes along and does exactly what they've been trying to do for decades. She brings mainstream attention and genuine excitement to women's basketball. You'd think this would be a hallelujah moment for WNBA leadership. Finally, they have someone who can carry the league to new heights, someone who can justify increased investment and media coverage. But instead of embracing this opportunity, they've allowed jealousy and resentment to poison the well. Veteran players who should be celebrating Clark's impact on the sport are instead treating her like an unwelcome intruder. The most frustrating part is how predictable this all was. Anyone who's followed women's sports for any length of time could have seen this coming. When a young, charismatic athlete starts bringing unprecedented attention to a struggling league, there's always going to be tension with established players who feel overlooked or undervalued. Smart leadership would have anticipated this and put systems in place to manage those dynamics. Instead, the WNBA seems to have been caught completely off guard by Clark's impact. They had no plan for how to handle the increased scrutiny, no strategy for managing player relationships, and no framework for dealing with controversial incidents. The result has been a series of self-inflicted wounds that have overshadowed what should have been the league's greatest triumph. Riley Gaines understood all of this intuitively because she's seen how sports organizations can sabotage themselves when they prioritize the wrong things. Her intervention wasn't just about defending Caitlin Clark, it was about calling out a pattern of institutional failure that threatens the future of women's basketball. She recognized that if the WNBA continues down this path, they'll waste the greatest opportunity in their history. The media's response to Gaines's criticism only proved her point further. Instead of addressing the substance of her arguments, they attacked her personally. Jemele Hill, the former ESPN host, called Gaines a grifter for even bringing up the controversy. Other commentators tried to gaslight viewers by claiming Griner said something completely different than what appeared obvious on the video. But here's what makes Gaines's intervention so powerful. She told people to watch the video and make up their own minds. She didn't try to tell them what to think or see. She just pointed out the obvious hypocrisy and let the evidence speak for itself. That's exactly what honest journalism looks like, and it's exactly what the mainstream sports media refused to do. The denial of media credentials to Outkick was particularly telling, because it revealed the WNBA's strategy for dealing with uncomfortable questions. Instead of addressing issues transparently, they simply try to prevent anyone from asking about them. It's a strategy that might work short-term, but it's guaranteed to backfire eventually. Riley Gaines just accelerated that timeline by bringing national attention to their selective enforcement and media manipulation. What's especially concerning about the credential denial is what it reveals about the WNBA's relationship with media, in general. This isn't how confident organizations operate. When you're secure in your positions and decisions, you welcome questions because you know you can defend your actions. When you start blocking access and controlling information, it usually means you know your positions are indefensible. The WNBA's media strategy has always been problematic. But this incident exposed just how far they're willing to go to protect their preferred narratives. They've essentially created a two-tiered system where friendly outlets get access and critical voices get shut out. This might seem clever in the short term, but it's actually incredibly damaging to their long-term credibility. Think about what message this sends to fans and potential sponsors. If the league is willing to block journalists from asking basic questions about player conduct, what else are they hiding? If they can't handle straightforward inquiries about controversial incidents, how can anyone trust them to run a professional sports organization? The credential denial also revealed something else troubling: the WNBA's apparent belief that they can control public discourse about their league. They seem to think that if they just prevent certain questions from being asked in official settings, they can make controversial topics disappear. This shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern media works. In today's environment, trying to suppress information or limit access usually has the opposite effect. It makes people more curious, more suspicious, and more likely to share alternative sources of information. By denying Outkick's credentials, the WNBA didn't kill the story. They gave it more legs and made themselves look like they had something to hide. Riley Gaines understood this dynamic perfectly, which is why she made the credential denial such a central part of her criticism. She knew that most people's instinctive reaction would be to wonder why the WNBA was so afraid of basic questions. By highlighting this aspect of the controversy, she turned the league's defensive strategy against them. The broader implications of the credential situation extend far beyond this single incident. It's created a precedent that other sports organizations are probably watching closely. If the WNBA can get away with blocking access to journalists who ask uncomfortable questions, what's to stop other leagues from doing the same thing? This could be the beginning of a much more troubling trend in sports media. What's most damaging about this entire situation is how it highlights the WNBA's misplaced priorities. They have a once-in-a-generation opportunity with Caitlin Clark's popularity, but they're squandering it to protect players who seem determined to undermine that success. Clark is transforming women's basketball, bringing unprecedented attention and revenue to the sport. But rather than embracing this transformation, certain elements within the league appear to resent it. The numbers don't lie about Clark's impact on the league. Television ratings for WNBA games featuring Clark have shattered previous records, sometimes drawing more viewers than NBA games. Merchandise sales have exploded, with Clark jerseys outselling those of established superstars. Arena attendance has reached levels the league hasn't seen in years, with many games selling out completely. But perhaps most importantly, Clark has brought a completely new demographic to women's basketball. These aren't just existing basketball fans who are paying more attention. These are people who never cared about the WNBA before, but are now invested in following Clark's career. This is exactly the kind of audience expansion that struggling sports leagues dream about. The economic implications are staggering. Clark's popularity has already led to increased sponsorship deals, better television contracts, and higher ticket prices across the league. Players who resent her success are literally benefiting financially from the attention she brings, even as they publicly criticize or target her on the court. This is what makes the WNBA's failure to protect Clark so inexcusable. They're not just failing to support one player. They're undermining the financial future of their entire organization. Every incident that makes Clark look bad or drives away her fans is money out of everyone's pockets. Every controversy that overshadows her achievements is a missed opportunity for positive growth. Riley Gaines recognized this economic reality immediately, which is why her criticism hit so hard. She wasn't just making moral arguments about fairness. She was pointing out that the WNBA's behavior was financially suicidal. Organizations that actively work against their own economic interests don't survive long in competitive markets. The Clark phenomenon has also exposed how out of touch WNBA leadership really is with their potential audience. For years, they've been trying to build their brand around social activism and political messaging, apparently believing that this was what would attract mainstream attention. But Clark's success proves that what people really want is just great basketball and compelling personalities. Clark's appeal isn't complicated. She's an incredibly skilled player who plays with obvious passion and joy. She makes difficult shots look easy and brings an energy to the court that's infectious. She's also articulate, humble, and relatable in interviews. These are timeless qualities that have always attracted sports fans, regardless of political beliefs or social causes. The lesson should be obvious: focus on basketball excellence and let everything else be secondary. But instead of learning from Clark's success, the WNBA seems determined to complicate things with unnecessary drama and controversy. They're taking what should be a simple success story and turning it into a divisive mess. The organizational culture that prioritizes protecting certain narratives over basic fairness is exactly what Riley Gaines has become expert at identifying and calling out. She's seen how institutions can become so captured by ideology that they lose sight of their basic mission. In the WNBA's case, that mission should be promoting women's basketball and supporting female athletes. But when they investigate fake controversies while ignoring real ones, when they deny media access to journalists asking legitimate questions, they're failing spectacularly. Riley Gaines forced everyone to confront these contradictions. She made it impossible for the WNBA to pretend their selective enforcement and obvious double standards were anything other than organizational corruption. The league now faces a choice: acknowledge these problems and work to fix them, or continue down the path of self-destruction that Gaines so accurately identified. The broader implications extend far beyond basketball. This is a perfect example of how institutional capture can lead organizations to act against their own interests. The WNBA has an incredible opportunity with Clark's popularity, but they're squandering it to appease internal factions more interested in ideology than success. Gaines has seen this pattern before in her own sport, and she wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen again without speaking up. Her moral authority on these issues makes her criticism impossible to dismiss or ignore. When organizations start trying to control information and limit accountability, it's usually because they know they can't defend their actions on merit. Gaines forced them to confront that reality, and their response only confirmed her assessment. The ripple effects of Gaines's intervention are already being felt throughout the sports world. Other athletes and commentators who might have stayed silent are now speaking up about similar issues in their own sports. Her courage in calling out institutional dysfunction has inspired others to examine their own organizations more critically. This is perhaps the most significant long-term impact of the controversy. Gaines hasn't just exposed problems in the WNBA, she's provided a template for how athletes and advocates can hold sports organizations accountable. Her approach of focusing on specific, documented incidents while connecting them to broader patterns of behavior is incredibly effective. The fact that she's been willing to take on powerful institutions and media figures has also demonstrated that these organizations aren't as untouchable as they might seem. When someone with credibility and platform is willing to speak truth to power, it can create real change. Other potential critics are watching how this plays out and learning from her example. Gaines has also shown how social media can be used effectively to bypass traditional gatekeepers and reach audiences directly. Instead of relying on mainstream sports media to tell her story fairly, she's taken her message straight to the public. This has allowed her to control her own narrative and avoid the filtering and distortion that often happens with controversial topics. The WNBA clearly wasn't prepared for this type of sustained criticism from someone with Gaines's profile and credibility. They probably expected that if they ignored the controversy long enough, it would fade away like so many others. But Gaines's involvement has elevated this to a national conversation that they can't simply wait out. Her intervention has also created accountability pressure that extends beyond just this incident. Now that she's established herself as a watchdog for WNBA conduct, the league knows they're being watched more closely. Future controversies won't be able to slide by without scrutiny, because critics know that Gaines is paying attention and willing to speak up. This ongoing oversight function might be the most valuable contribution Gaines makes to women's sports. The WNBA has operated for years with relatively little external accountability, partly because women's sports receive less media coverage in general. But now they have someone with platform and credibility specifically monitoring their behavior and calling out problems when they occur. The fact that mainstream sports media tried to provide cover for Griner while attacking Gaines only strengthened her position. When you're taking flack, you know you're over the target. The desperate attempts to reinterpret obvious audio and video evidence showed how committed certain media figures are to protecting narratives that don't align with reality. What's even more telling is how quickly these same media personalities pivoted to personal attacks instead of addressing the substance of Gaines's arguments. They couldn't defend the WNBA's actions, so they attacked the messenger. This is a classic sign that they know they're on the wrong side of the issue, but can't admit it publicly without undermining their credibility with their audience. What makes this controversy so explosive is that it reveals the WNBA's true priorities. They're more concerned with managing certain players' resentments than protecting their most valuable asset. They're willing to investigate phantom controversies while ignoring real ones caught on video. They'll block media access when journalists try to ask legitimate questions. This isn't how successful organizations operate. The irony is absolutely stunning when you really think about it. Here's a league that has struggled for decades to gain mainstream attention and financial stability. They've watched as women's soccer, tennis, and other sports have built massive followings, while basketball remained largely ignored by casual fans. Then along comes Caitlin Clark, a generational talent who single-handedly transforms their entire landscape. And what do? They allow her to be targeted, attacked, and undermined by the very system that should be protecting her. It's like watching someone throw away a winning lottery ticket because they don't like the numbers that came up. The WNBA had everything they needed for sustained success literally handed to them, and they're actively working to destroy it. This level of organizational incompetence would be almost impressive if it weren't so tragic for the sport itself. Riley Gaines essentially called the WNBA's bluff and forced them to show their true colors. They can either start treating all players fairly and applying consistent standards, or they can continue proving that they're more interested in protecting certain narratives than building a successful league. Based on their response so far, it's clear which direction they're heading. The most damaging aspect of Gaines's intervention might be how she's made this controversy impossible to ignore or explain away. Before her involvement, the mainstream sports media was content to let this story fade into obscurity. They figured if they didn't talk about it long enough, people would forget and move on to the next controversy. But Gaines's platform and credibility have ensured that won't happen. She's turned what could have been a one-day social media dust-up into a sustained examination of the WNBA's fundamental problems. Every day they don't address this situation honestly, they prove her point about being committed to self-destruction. Every attempt to deflect or provide cover for Griner only reinforces the narrative that the league operates with obvious double standards. The aftermath will be fascinating to watch. Gaines has made sure the WNBA's hypocrisy can no longer be hidden or explained away. She's delivered a reality check that the league desperately needed, even if they're too stubborn to accept it. For Caitlin Clark's sake, and for the sake of women's basketball in general, hopefully they'll choose to change course. But if they don't, at least Riley Gaines has made sure everyone will know exactly why the WNBA failed to capitalize on the greatest opportunity in their history. Sometimes it takes an outsider to point out what insiders refuse to acknowledge. In this case, that outsider just happened to be a fearless former swimmer who isn't afraid to call out corruption when she sees it. What's particularly brilliant about Gaines' strategy is how she's made this bigger than just one incident or one player. She's used this controversy as a lens to examine the entire organizational culture of the WNBA. The Griner video was just the catalyst. The real story is about how a supposedly professional sports league operates with such obvious bias and incompetence. The timing couldn't have been more perfect either. This controversy erupted right in the middle of the WNBA's most successful season in terms of viewership and attendance, almost entirely thanks to Caitlin Clark's popularity. So when Gaines points out how they're undermining their own success, it's not theoretical. It's happening in real time for everyone to see. The contrast is absolutely stark when you look at the numbers. Games featuring Caitlin Clark are drawing television audiences that dwarf the league's historical averages. Her jersey sales have broken records. Ticket prices for Fever games have skyrocketed, and venues are selling out regularly. By every measurable metric, Clark has been a massive success for the WNBA. But instead of capitalizing on this success, the league has allowed it to be overshadowed by manufactured controversies and internal drama. Every day that goes by with these distractions is a day where the focus should be on Clark's incredible rookie season and what it means for the future of women's basketball. The opportunity cost is enormous. This should be the WNBA's breakthrough moment, the season that establishes them as a legitimate mainstream sports property. Instead, casual fans who tuned in because of Clark are being exposed to dysfunction, controversy, and organizational incompetence. Many of them probably won't stick around for future seasons. Marketing professionals who work with sports properties must be watching this situation with absolute horror. The WNBA has been handed the perfect product, a young, talented, charismatic athlete who naturally draws attention and generates excitement. This is exactly what brands want to associate with. But the league's mismanagement of the situation is making it a much riskier investment. Sponsors and partners are probably having serious conversations about whether they want to be associated with an organization that can't protect its biggest assets or manage basic public relations challenges. The WNBA's behavior sends a message that they're not ready for prime time, which could impact future deals and partnerships. The international implications are also significant. Women's basketball is growing globally, and the WNBA should be positioned as the premier league in the world. But this kind of organizational dysfunction damages their credibility on the international stage. Other countries are developing their own women's basketball leagues, and the WNBA's problems make it easier for talent to consider alternative options. Riley Gaines understood all of these dynamics when she chose to get involved. She recognized that this wasn't just about one incident or one player. It was about the entire trajectory of women's professional basketball. Her intervention was perfectly timed to maximize impact and force a broader conversation about the WNBA's priorities and leadership. The WNBA thought they could control the narrative and suppress uncomfortable questions. Riley Gaines just proved them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Her intervention has ensured that this controversy won't disappear quietly, and the league's response has only made her case stronger. She's forced them to choose between fairness and favoritism, and their choice is being made in full view of the public. This is what happens when organizations prioritize politics over performance, narratives over fairness, and ideology over success. Riley Gaines just held up a mirror to the WNBA's dysfunction, and they didn't like what they saw. But sometimes that's exactly what corrupt institutions need. Someone willing to tell them the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes them feel. Riley Gaines understood all of these dynamics when she chose to get involved. She recognized that this wasn't just about one incident or one player. It was about the entire trajectory of women's professional basketball. Her intervention was perfectly timed to maximize impact and force a broader conversation about the WNBA's priorities and leadership. The WNBA thought they could control the narrative and suppress uncomfortable questions. Riley Gaines just proved them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Her intervention has ensured that this controversy won't disappear quietly, and the league's response has only made her case stronger. She's forced them to choose between fairness and favoritism, and their choice is being made in full view of the public. This is what happens when organizations prioritize politics over performance, narratives over fairness, and ideology over success. Riley Gaines just held up a mirror to the WNBA's dysfunction, and they didn't like what they saw. But sometimes that's exactly what corrupt institutions need. Someone willing to tell them the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes them feel.